I'm Rachel Miller, 32, living in Denver working as a tax analyst. After years of working late nights and paying off student loans, I finally built a clean credit score and started saving for my first condo. So when I got mortgage papers in the mail for a house worth $375,000, I was confused. Then came the call from my parents. "We used your name to buy your sister a house. You're going to pay for it." When I refused, they actually sued me demanding I pay for everything. What followed was a nightmare that tore my family apart, ruined holidays, and put me in court against the people who were supposed to protect me. Before I share how I fought back and what happened next, let me know where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe if you want more true stories about family and financial drama that might save you from the same fate. To understand how it got this bad between me and my family, you need to know who the Millers really are. I will never forget the moment I saw that envelope from First Federal Mortgage in my mailbox. My hands shook as I pulled it out, staring at the bold logo on the corner. I hadn't bought a house, let alone a house worth $375,000. Why would they send me payment documents? The late afternoon sun felt harsh on my face as I stood by the curb, tearing the envelope open with trembling fingers. My eyes scanned the page, the words blurring for a second as my brain tried to process them. Mortgage approval. Monthly payment of $2,400. My name, Rachel Miller, typed neatly at the top. It felt like the world tilted under my feet. I stumbled inside my small Denver apartment, dropping my keys on the floor as I made my way to the kitchen counter. I laid the papers down, spreading them out, flipping page after page. Each page had my name. Some had my signature. Or at least it looked like my signature. I grabbed my laptop and logged into my credit report, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. The mortgage was there, listed under my name, fully approved 2 weeks ago. My credit score had already dipped the mortgage, pulling it down like a rock in water. I felt bile rise in my throat. My hands were clammy, my breathing shallow. I had spent years paying off $42,000 of student loans. I had worked weekends, late nights, skipped vacations, all to build the clean credit I needed to buy my first condo next year. Now it was ruined. I sat down on the kitchen floor, papers scattered around me, pressing the heels of my hands into my eyes. I was trying to stop the tears, to stop the panic, but a sob slipped out anyway. I don't know how long I sat there before my phone rang, vibrating against the tile floor. I stared at the screen, seeing the words "Mom Cell" glow back at me. My thumb hovered over the answer button. Then I pressed it. "Hi, Mom," I said, my voice hoarse. "Rachel, sweetie," my mother's voice came through, calm, too calm. "Did you get the house papers yet?" I froze. "What did you say?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. "The papers from the mortgage company," she continued, her tone casual, like she was talking about a birthday card she had sent. "Did you get them today?" My vision narrowed and I pressed the phone tighter to my ear. "Mom, what the hell is going on?" There was a pause, a small sigh. "Don't be dramatic, Rachel," she said softly. "We can talk about it later." "No," I snapped, my voice rising. "You tell me right now. Did you use my name to buy a house?" "Your father and I just thought it would be easier this way," she said, her voice suddenly sharp. "It's a family matter. We will explain when you come home." I heard a click. She had hung up. I stared at the phone in my hand, my breath coming in short gasps. My mind raced through every possibility, but they all led back to one terrifying thought. My parents had used my name to buy a house I didn't know about, a house I didn't agree to. I pushed myself off the floor, grabbing my purse and the mortgage papers. My hands were still shaking as I found my car keys, nearly dropping them as I headed toward the door. I needed answers. And I was going to get them tonight. I drove the entire way to my parents' house, gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. The Denver skyline faded in my rearview mirror as I pushed down the highway, my mind spinning with every worst-case scenario. How could they do this? How could they use my name, my credit, my future for something I didn't agree to? My phone buzzed on the passenger seat. A text from my dad. "Drive safe. We'll talk when you get here." I ignored it. The sun was setting as I pulled into the familiar neighborhood I grew up in. The houses looked exactly the same, with trimmed lawns and American flags waving on porches. It should have felt comforting, but I felt like I was stepping into enemy territory. I parked in front of the house, the same house I had left when I went to college at 18, determined to make my own way without asking them for a single dollar. Their porch light was on, and I could see shadows moving behind the curtains. I took a deep breath, grabbing the mortgage papers, and walked up the steps. The door opened before I could knock. "Rachel, honey," my mom said, her smile tight, her eyes darting to the papers in my hand. "Don't honey me," I snapped, stepping inside. "What did you do?" My dad was sitting in his recliner, the television muted, his face blank as he looked at me. "Let's sit down," he said. I didn't sit. "You used my name to buy a house," I said, my voice shaking. "Tell me I'm wrong." My mom closed the door and leaned against it, folding her arms. "Rachel, it's not what you think," she started. "It's exactly what I think," I fired back. "You forged my signature, you applied for a mortgage in my name, and now I'm responsible for a $375,000 loan I never agreed to." My dad sighed, leaning forward, elbows on his knees. "Your sister needed help," he said, as if that explained everything. "Sophie," I almost laughed, but it came out as a choked sound. "Sophie can't hold a job for more than 3 months, and now you think buying her a house in my name is going to fix her life?" My mom's eyes flared. "Don't talk about your sister like that." "I'll talk about her however I want," I snapped, since apparently I'm the one paying for her now. My dad stood up, his hands raised. "Rachel, listen," he said, his voice calm, the same voice he used when I was a kid, trying to explain why I should just go along with whatever he decided. "We needed to act quickly. The market is hot right now, and this house was a perfect opportunity for Sophie to get a fresh start. She deserves that." At my expense, I shouted, tears burning behind my eyes. "I've worked my ass off for years to build my credit, to pay off my loans, to save for my own place, and you just decided to take that from me without even asking." My mom stepped forward, her voice softening. "Rachel, you're doing well. You can afford this. Sophie can't. Family takes care of family." "No," I said, shaking my head, stepping back. "You don't get to decide how I take care of this family." My dad's face hardened. "The house is already in your name," he said, his voice cold. "There's nothing to change now. You're going to help your sister whether you like it or not." The finality in his voice made something snap inside me. I threw the papers onto the coffee table, the pages sliding across the wood. "This is fraud," I said, my voice steady now. "You committed fraud, and you think I'm just going to roll over and accept it." My mom's eyes widened, and she looked at my dad. "Don't say that word," she hissed. "It's the truth," I said, "and I'm not going to let you ruin my life because you can't say no to Sophie." My dad stepped closer, towering over me. "Lower your voice," he said, his jaw tight. "You are not going to destroy this family over money." I looked up at him, feeling the rage boil in my chest. "Watch me." I turned and walked out, my mother calling my name, but I didn't look back. The cold air hit me as I stepped outside, and I sucked in a breath, trying to calm the pounding in my head. I fumbled with my keys, my hands shaking as I got into my car. I started the engine, gripping the steering wheel, staring at the house I once called home. They thought I would just accept this. They thought I would pay for Sophie's house because it was easier than fighting back. They were wrong. I shifted the car into drive, pulling away from the curb as the porch light glowed behind me. I was going to fight this, no matter what it cost me. I didn't know that stepping into my childhood home in Denver that night would destroy my family forever. The familiar creak of the front door felt wrong as I stepped inside. The living room smelled the same, a mix of old carpet and my mom's lavender spray. But the air was heavy, thick with something I couldn't name. My dad, Tom, was sitting in his recliner, wearing the same gray Broncos hoodie he always wore. He was 60, retired early after working years as a mechanic, but he looked older tonight. My mom, Linda, was in the kitchen wiping her hands on a dish towel, her eyes red and puffy. And then there was Sophie. She was sitting on the couch, scrolling on her phone, her blonde hair pulled up in a messy bun. 28, unemployed, and living in an apartment she could barely afford. I knew she had credit card debt, $16,000 last time I heard, but she never seemed worried. I stood there clutching the papers, the silence stretching until it felt like it would choke me. "Sit down, Rachel," my dad said, his voice calm. "I'm fine standing," I shot back. My mom glanced at my dad before stepping forward. "Sweetie, we need to talk about this calmly." I held up the mortgage papers. You mean talk about how you stole my identity to buy a house for Sophie? My mom's lip trembled. Don't say it like that. How should I say it? I snapped, my voice rising. You used my credit. You forged my signature. You took out a $375,000 loan in my name without asking. My dad stood crossing his arms over his chest. Sophie needed help, he said. She found a house in Aurora, a good place, a chance to start over. I let out a bitter laugh. And that means you get to steal my future to pay for hers. My mom's eyes filled with tears and she reached out for my hand, but I pulled away. Rachel, please, she said, her voice breaking. We're family. Family helps each other. You have a good job. You're doing well. Sophie needs this. I felt like the air had been knocked out of me. You think that just because I've worked hard I owe you this? My voice shook. That I should just pay for Sophie's life because she won't get it together. Sophie finally looked up from her phone, her eyes narrowing. I'm trying, Rachel, she said, her tone defensive. It's not my fault the system is stacked against people like me. People like you, I repeated, my jaw clenching. People who can't hold a job for more than 3 months because they're too busy partying. Enough, my dad snapped, his voice loud enough to make me flinch. You will not speak to your sister that way. I turned to him, anger rising like fire in my chest. I will speak the truth, I said. You didn't even ask me. You just decided that my life, my credit, my money was yours to use for Sophie. My mom wiped her tears, shaking her head. Rachel, we thought you would understand. You've always been the responsible one. You've always taken care of things. That doesn't mean you get to steal from me, I yelled. My dad stepped closer, his eyes cold. This is your responsibility, Rachel, he said. You're her sister. It's your job to help her get a start in life. My vision blurred with tears I refused to let fall. Your job was to be her parents, I said, my voice low, and you failed. Sophie stood up, her face red. How can you be so selfish? She shouted. I'm your sister. I turned to her, breathing hard, and I'm not your bank. My mom sobbed, covering her mouth with her hand. Rachel, please, she whispered. I shook my head, backing toward the door, the papers still in my hand. I'm not paying for this, I said, my voice breaking. I reached for the doorknob, my hand shaking as I heard my dad's voice one last time. If you walk out that door, don't expect to come back. I paused, swallowing the lump in my throat. Good, I whispered. I opened the door and stepped into the cold night air, slamming it behind me as tears finally streamed down my face. The cold air hit my face as I walked to my car, wiping tears with the back of my hand. My chest felt tight, each breath sharp and uneven. I fumbled with my keys, dropping them once before I managed to unlock the door. I slid into the driver's seat, gripping the steering wheel, staring at the dark street ahead. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, seeing Sophie's name flashing on the screen. I let it ring until it stopped. A moment later, a text popped up. You're tearing this family apart, Rachel. I threw the phone onto the passenger seat, pressing my palms against my forehead. Tearing the family apart. They had stolen my name, my credit, my future, and I was the villain. I turned on the ignition, the engine rumbling in the quiet street. I pulled away from the house, the porch light still on, my mother's shadow visible through the window. I didn't know where to go, so I drove. I passed the grocery store I used to go to with my mom. The park where my dad taught me to ride a bike. The streets were filled with memories that felt poison now. I ended up in a quiet parking lot near Sloan's Lake, the water dark under the streetlights. I parked and let the silence wrap around me. My phone buzzed again. This time it was my mom. I closed my eyes, letting it ring. When it stopped, another message appeared. We can fix this. Just come home. Home. That word didn't mean anything anymore. I opened my phone and scrolled to my friend Leah's contact. She was the only person I could think of at that moment. I hit call. She answered on the second ring. Rachel, are you okay? Her voice broke something in me. No, I whispered, choking on the word. Where are you? She asked quickly. I told her and she said she would be there in 10 minutes. I sat there, my hands shaking, trying to calm my breathing. I watched the lights of cars passing by, people going home to families that probably weren't trying to ruin their lives. Headlights pulled in and Leah parked next to me. She jumped out of her car and came to my window, knocking gently. I opened the door and she crouched down, looking at me. What happened? I handed her the mortgage papers, unable to speak. She read the top page, her eyes widening. Are you serious? They did this without telling you? I nodded, wiping my face with my sleeve. She stood up, opening my door wider. Come on. You're coming to my place tonight. I hesitated. Rachel, you can't be alone right now, she said, her voice firm. I grabbed the papers and my purse, getting out of the car. Leah wrapped an arm around me, guiding me to her car. As we drove to her apartment, she didn't ask questions. She just let me sit in silence, staring out the window as the city lights blurred past. When we got to her place, she made me tea, setting it in front of me on the kitchen counter. Whatever they did, we'll figure it out, she said softly. I looked at her, tears in my eyes. I don't know what to do, Leah. They're my family. And you're allowed to protect yourself, she said. I opened the papers again, staring at the numbers, the payment schedule, the debt that was now tied to my name. I felt the fear and anger rise again, mixing into something sharp. They think I'm going to pay for this, I said quietly. Leah nodded. What are you going to do? I looked up at her, my jaw tightening. I'm not paying a single cent for that house, I said. I closed the papers, feeling a new clarity in my chest. If they wanted a fight, I would give them one. And I would not lose. I thought it would end when I said no. I was wrong. It was only the beginning. The next morning, I called Emily. She was my best friend from college, now a real estate attorney in Denver. My hands shook as I dialed her number, pacing Leah's small kitchen. Rach, Emily answered, her voice warm but cautious. Are you okay? No, I said, clutching the mortgage papers. I need your help. An hour later, I was sitting in Emily's office downtown, the papers spread across her desk. She wore her dark hair tied back, glasses perched on her nose as she flipped through each page. Rachel, she said, slowly tapping her pen against the page with my signature. This isn't your signature, is it? I shook my head. And this notary stamp, she continued, squinting at the seal, it's fake. The number doesn't match any registered notary in Colorado. My stomach dropped. So what does that mean? I whispered. It means this mortgage was fraudulently filed using your identity. Emily said, her voice firm now. They forged your name, Rachel. I let out a shaky breath, pressing my fingers against my forehead. I can't believe they did this to me. Emily reached across the desk, squeezing my hand. They never thought you'd fight back, she said softly. I nodded, wiping a tear away before it could fall. We spent the next hour making copies of everything, Emily explaining the process of filing a fraud report with the mortgage company and credit bureaus. She told me to keep records of every message, every call, every email from my parents. They're going to pressure you, she warned. Do not give in. That afternoon, I drove back to my apartment, my mind racing with everything Emily had said. I sat in my car scrolling through Instagram to distract myself, but then I saw it. Sophie had posted a photo of herself standing in front of the house in Aurora, smiling, her arms stretched wide. New beginnings, the caption read, followed by a heart emoji. And then the part that made my blood boil. Thank you to my amazing sister for helping me get my first home. I could feel the heat rush to my face, my hands shaking as I stared at the screen. The comments under the post were filled with people congratulating her, praising me for being such a supportive sister. I threw my phone onto the passenger seat, letting out a scream that echoed in the car. She was acting like I had willingly given her this, like I was happy to sacrifice everything I had worked for so she could play house. My phone buzzed again. A text from my mom. Don't forget the first payment is due in 2 weeks. Another text followed. It's only $2,400 a month, Rachel. You can handle that. I didn't respond. Then came the calls. My mom, my dad, even Sophie, leaving voicemails about how I needed to step up, how family came first, how I was being cold and selfish. I blocked their numbers, but they found new ones to call from. The voicemails kept coming. I tried to focus on work, burying myself in tax reports and client emails, but I couldn't escape the buzzing of my phone, the constant notifications that made my chest tighten every time I looked. Then it got worse. I was called into HR at my firm. I walked into the small office, my heart pounding as my HR manager, Jeff, closed the door behind me. Rachel, he said, clearing his throat, we received an email from someone claiming to be a family member. They said you're experiencing a mental health crisis and might be a risk to your clients. I stared at him, the words sinking in like stones. What I managed to say. Jeff sighed, folding his hands on the desk. I'm not saying we believe it, but we need to address it. Is there something going on at home you want to talk about? I closed my eyes, trying to steady my breathing. It's a family situation, I said quietly. They're trying to force me to pay for something I didn't agree to, and now they're trying to ruin my life when I refuse. Jeff nodded slowly. Take the day if you need it, Rachel. We're here if you need support. I nodded, standing up, my legs feeling weak as I walked out of his office. As I stepped outside into the cold Denver air, my phone buzzed again. An email notification. I glanced down at the subject line. Notice of lawsuit. I stopped in the middle of the sidewalk, the world spinning around me. They were really going to sue me. I stood frozen on the sidewalk, clutching my phone, reading those 3 words over and over. Notice of lawsuit. People moved around me, rushing to lunch or heading back to work, but I couldn't move. My ears buzzed, and for a moment I couldn't catch my breath. I forced myself to walk back to my car, each step heavy, my mind spinning. In the driver's seat, I opened the email. My parents had hired an attorney. They were suing me for the entire mortgage balance, claiming I had verbally agreed to pay for the house and was now refusing to uphold a family commitment. They were calling me a liar. They were calling me a thief. I scrolled down, seeing the attachments. Legal documents, demand letters, copies of the mortgage papers with my forged signature now being used as evidence against me. I slammed my phone onto the passenger seat, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. How could they do this to me? How could my own parents turn me into the villain to protect Sophie's fantasy life? My phone rang. It was Emily. Did you get it? She asked immediately. Yes, I whispered, my voice shaking. Rachel, listen to me, she said, her voice firm. Do not respond to them directly. Forward the email to me. We need to act fast. Tears blurred my vision as I opened the email and hit forward, sending it to Emily. I can't believe they're doing this, I choked out. Emily was quiet for a moment. I can, she said softly. They think you'll fold. That you'll pay just to make it stop. I wiped my face with the back of my hand. I'm not paying for this, I said. I know, Emily replied. We're going to fight this. I'm connecting you with a litigation attorney today. You need to protect yourself, Rachel. I nodded, though she couldn't see me. I'm so tired, Emily, I whispered. I know you are, she said. But you're stronger than you think. We hung up, and I sat there staring out the windshield, watching the people walking by, living normal lives. I drove home, every mile filled with dread, thinking about what would happen if I lost this fight. My credit would be destroyed. I would be drowning in debt for a house I didn't own, for a sister who didn't care. When I got home, I collapsed on my couch, the papers still open on my phone, the lawsuit a dark cloud over everything. My phone buzzed again. A text from Sophie. You did this to yourself. Just pay the mortgage and end this. I stared at the message, the rage in my chest mixing with exhaustion. I thought of every time I covered for her, every time I paid for her gas, for her rent, for her emergencies that never ended. I thought of my parents sitting in that house, deciding my future without me. And I realized something. They thought I would give in. That I would sacrifice my life, my credit, my peace, just to keep the family from falling apart. They were wrong. I opened my laptop, pulling up the list Emily had sent me. A litigation attorney named Mark Harris was at the top. I dialed the number, my hands steady for the first time in days. Mark Harris, this is Rachel Miller, I said when he answered. I need to fight my family, and I need to win. I never thought my parents would sue their own daughter until I held the lawsuit demanding $375,000 in my hands. I sat on the floor of my apartment, the thick stack of papers spread out in front of me. My breathing was shallow, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. They were really doing this. They wanted me to pay for Sophie's house, the legal fees, $18,000, and they were claiming I had agreed to it verbally. That I was backing out of a family commitment. I felt like I couldn't move, the weight of it pressing down on me, crushing me. My vision blurred and I let out a small broken sob before I could stop it. I hadn't slept in days, tossing and turning at night, checking my phone at 3 a.m. Terrified of losing my job, terrified of my future being ruined. My credit score had already dropped from 785 to 710 just from the mortgage appearing on my report. I had worked for years to build that score, sacrificing vacations, dinners out, new clothes, just to make sure I could buy my own home one day. Now it was slipping away because my family decided I owed them everything. I picked up my phone and called Emily, my fingers trembling. "Rachel," she answered immediately. "Are you okay?" "No," I whispered, my voice cracking. "They filed it. They really filed it." Emily was quiet for a moment. "I'm so sorry, Rach," she said softly. "We're going to get through this. I promise." She sent me the contact for Mark Harris, a litigation attorney she trusted. I called him that afternoon, sitting in my car in the parking lot of my office, my hands sweating as I held the phone to my ear. Rachel Miller. Mark's voice was calm, confident. "Emily told me about your situation. I can help you, but you need to understand litigation is expensive." I closed my eyes, swallowing hard. "How much?" I asked. "My retainer fee is $8,000, he said. "That will cover the initial filings, but if this goes to court, costs will increase." $8,000, almost everything in my emergency fund. The fund I had built to protect myself, to feel safe. Now it would be gone because my parents were trying to destroy me. "I'll send over the retainer agreement today," Mark said. "The sooner we file your response, the better." I ended the call staring at the dashboard, tears rolling down my cheeks. For a moment, I thought about giving up. About paying the mortgage, letting them win just so it would stop, so I could sleep again. But then, as I sat there, my phone buzzed with a notification. Instagram. I opened it and there she was. Sophie standing in front of the house in Aurora, holding a coffee, smiling with her perfect hair and perfect nails. "Sunday vibes in my new home," her caption read. She had tagged the location, bragging about her fresh start, her dream home. The comments were filled with her friends praising her, telling her how lucky she was, how they were so proud of her. I felt something shift inside me. They thought I would break. They thought I would sacrifice everything to protect them. They thought wrong. I wiped my tears, opened my laptop, and signed the retainer agreement with Mark Harris. If they wanted a fight, I would give them one. I would not let them take my life from me. I wired the $8,000 to Mark the next morning, feeling every penny like a punch to the gut. I watched the balance in my savings drop to a number that made me feel exposed, like the safety net I had spent years building was gone in a single moment. Mark called me that afternoon. "Rachel, I've reviewed the lawsuit," he said, his voice steady. "They're claiming you verbally agreed to pay for the mortgage and that you backed out, causing financial harm to your parents and sister." I sat at my kitchen table, clutching my coffee mug so hard my fingers ached. "That's a lie," I said quietly. "I know," Mark replied. "We're going to file a formal response denying all allegations and countersue for financial abuse and identity fraud." My heart pounded. "Are you sure we can win this?" Mark paused for a moment. "I'm confident," he said. "But you need to understand, Rachel, this will get uglier before it gets better. They will try to pressure you. They will try to scare you." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "I'm ready," I said. That night, I barely slept. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about every holiday, every birthday, every family dinner, wondering if all of it had meant nothing to them. I thought about my mom's tears, my dad's cold stare, Sophie's smug smile. They all expected me to fold. The next morning, I received a call from HR again. "Rachel, we received another email from your family," Jeff said, sounding uncomfortable. "They're claiming you've been stealing money from them and that you're unstable." I closed my eyes, anger rising in my chest. "That's not true," I said. "I believe you," Jeff said softly. "But you need to handle this. We can't have this disrupting your work." I hung up my hands, shaking, and texted Emily. "They're trying to destroy me," I wrote. "Don't let them," she replied. "You're stronger than they think." I opened my laptop, reading through the documents Mark had sent me. He had drafted the official response to the lawsuit, denying every claim, attaching the evidence of the forged documents, the fake notary stamp, and the emails and texts my parents had sent admitting what they did. He had also filed a counterclaim for identity theft, financial exploitation, and emotional distress. My phone buzzed again. Mark. Rachel, I just filed everything with the court, he said. You've officially responded and your family will be served with the countersuit. I exhaled, a mix of fear and relief washing over me. What happens now? I asked. Now we wait, Mark said, and we prepare. There was a pause, and then his voice softened. Rachel, I need you to be ready for what's coming. Your family will be exposed for what they did. They will try to twist everything, but the truth is on your side. I closed my eyes, letting his words sink in. Thank you, Mark, I said. You're welcome, he replied. And Rachel. Yeah. Prepare yourself. Your family is about to be exposed in court. I thought they couldn't go any lower until they started threatening to destroy everything I had built. It started with a text from my dad late one night. Your mom is in the hospital. She can't handle this stress. If you keep going, you'll kill her. I sat on my bed, the glow of the screen lighting up the dark room, my hands shaking. My chest tightened, a cold fear creeping through me. Then, another message. Is this worth your mother's life, Rachel? I covered my mouth, trying to muffle the sob that broke out of me. For a moment, I almost believed them, almost felt the old guilt trying to drag me back into submission. But then I remembered the forged papers. The sleepless nights. The lawsuit they filed against me. I wiped my tears and turned off my phone. The next morning, I woke up to a notification from Instagram. My stomach dropped when I saw Sophie's face on a GoFundMe link shared by mutual friends. Left behind by my sister trying to save my home, the title read. There was a video of her, fake tears in her eyes, talking about how I had abandoned her and left her homeless while I was living comfortably, refusing to help. Thousands of shares. Hundreds of comments calling me selfish, heartless, ungrateful. People who didn't even know me telling me to do the right thing. I slammed my laptop shut, breathing hard, my hands shaking with anger. That afternoon, HR called me in. Rachel, Jeff said, avoiding eye contact, we think it's best if you take some time off. 2 weeks unpaid to get things in order. I stared at him, the words echoing in my head. You're suspending me, I asked. It's not a suspension, Jeff said quickly. It's a wellness break. I walked out of the office, my ears ringing, the world around me a blur. I got home, dropped my bag on the floor, and collapsed onto the couch, staring at the ceiling. For a moment, I thought about giving up, letting them win. Letting them take the house, the money, everything, just so I could breathe again. But then in the middle of that darkness, I opened Facebook and searched for financial abuse support groups. I found one called Children of Financial Abuse Parents and joined. Within minutes, strangers were welcoming me, sharing stories so similar it made me cry. One post said, "You do not owe your life to pay for someone else's irresponsibility." Another said, "Family doesn't get to abuse you just because they're family." I felt seen for the first time in weeks. That night, I opened the folder where I had saved screenshots and emails. I found one from my mom to my dad months ago. "If we ask Rachel, she'll say no," she wrote. "Just sign it. She won't dare fight us." I stared at the words, anger and clarity settling in my chest. They knew I wouldn't agree. They counted on my silence, my fear, my guilt. Not this time. I closed my laptop and sat in the quiet, the glow of the screen fading from the room. My breathing slowed as I felt something solid forming inside me, like steel, replacing the fear that had lived in my chest for weeks. They thought I would break. They thought they could guilt me, shame me, scare me into submission. But they were wrong. The next morning, I called Mark, the phone cold against my ear, as I stood by the kitchen window watching the sunrise over Denver. "Mark, it's Rachel," I said. "How are you holding up?" he asked. "I'm ready," I said, my voice steady. "Whatever it takes, I'm not backing down." There was a pause, then I heard him exhale. "I'm glad to hear that," he said. "Because we just got the court date." I gripped the edge of the counter, my heart pounding. When I asked, 3 weeks from today, he said. "That's when you'll get to tell your side under oath." I nodded, swallowing hard. "Will it be enough?" I asked. "It will be," Mark said. "We have the emails, the forged documents, the fake notary. We have your credit reports showing the damage. And we have your testimony." I pressed my lips together, letting the weight of it settle. I want to add the messages they sent me, I said. The threats. The hospital guilt. The social media posts. Send them to me today, Mark said. Everything helps. After we hung up, I sat at the table and began gathering everything. Every text from my mom telling me I would kill her if I didn't pay. Every message from Sophie calling me a monster. Every screenshot of the GoFundMe page and the hateful comments from strangers. Every lie they had told about me, I printed and organized. That afternoon, I went for a walk around Sloan's Lake, the cold air burning my lungs, my boots crunching on the gravel path. I watched families jogging, kids riding scooters, couples holding hands. I wondered if those families would ever understand what it felt like to have your parents betray you. To have your sister weaponize the internet against you. To have your entire life turned upside down because you refused to pay for someone else's choices. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A message from Emily. You're doing the right thing. I'm proud of you. I typed back, thank you, I needed that. As the sun dipped below the mountains painting the sky in streaks of orange and pink, I made myself a promise. I would walk into that courtroom with my head high. I would not apologize for protecting myself. I would not let them silence me again. That evening, as I was cleaning up the papers on my coffee table, another text came in. This time from Mark. Rachel, the judge approved our evidence submission today, he wrote. Prepare yourself. Your family will be exposed in court. I never thought I would face my own parents in court, but that day I was no longer their weak daughter. The morning air was sharp as I walked up the courthouse steps in downtown Denver. My hands were cold, but my grip on the folder was steady. Mark met me outside dressed in a dark suit, his expression calm. You ready? He asked. I nodded. I'm ready. Inside, the courtroom smelled like old wood and coffee. The walls felt heavy, like they were holding the weight of every family that had stood here before me. Tom and Linda were already seated at the plaintiff's table, Sophie between them, her hair curled perfectly, her eyes puffy like she had been practicing tears. Their lawyer, a gray-haired man named Richard Blake, turned and gave me a polite nod, but his eyes were cold. Mark and I sat down, and I tried to steady my breathing as the judge entered. Case number 24 to 7865, Wilson versus Miller, the bailiff announced. All rise. We stood, and I felt the moment settle on my shoulders, heavier than I expected. The judge, a woman named Judge Carter, nodded for us to sit. Let's proceed, she said. Blake stood first, his voice smooth as he began. Your Honor, this case is about family obligations. About a daughter who promised to help her sister have a stable home, then abandoned that promise, leaving her family in financial ruin. I clenched my jaw, my fingers digging into the folder on my lap. Linda sniffled, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. Tom stared straight ahead, his arms crossed. Sophie wiped away a tear, shaking her head like she couldn't believe how cruel I was. Blake continued, painting me as selfish, ungrateful, cold. That I made good money and refused to help the family that raised me. When he finished, the courtroom fell quiet. Mark stood, buttoning his jacket. Your Honor, he began, his voice firm but calm, this is not a case about family obligations. This is a case about fraud. He walked forward, placing copies of the emails, text messages, and credit report on the table before the judge. Exhibit A, emails from the plaintiff admitting they knew Miss Miller would never agree to this mortgage. Exhibit B, the forged mortgage documents with a fraudulent notary seal. Exhibit C, Miss Miller's credit report showing a significant drop due to the fraudulent mortgage. Mark turned to the judge. Your Honor, this family did not ask Miss Miller for help. They stole her identity, forged her signature, and are now trying to manipulate the court to force her to pay for their decisions. My heart pounded as the judge flipped through the papers, her face unreadable. Mark pulled out his last piece, a printed screenshot of Sophie's Instagram video. And finally, Exhibit D, a video of Miss Sophie Miller celebrating her new home, claiming her sister made it possible while Miss Miller was unaware her credit and financial future were being used to fund it. The courtroom was silent, the only sound the faint buzzing of the fluorescent lights above us. Then Mark turned to me, nodding once. Rachel, it's time. I stood up, my legs steady as I walked to the witness stand. The bailiff swore me in, and I took a deep breath before sitting down. Judge Carter nodded at me. Miss Miller, you may proceed. I looked over at my parents. My mother's eyes were red, but she wouldn't meet my gaze. My father sat stiff, his jaw tight, his arms crossed. Sophie stared at me with a mix of fear and anger. I turned back to the judge. "I never agreed to pay for that house," I said, my voice clear. "They never asked me. They used my information, forged my signature, and took out a mortgage without my knowledge." Blake stood up quickly. "Objection, Your Honor, hearsay." Judge Carter raised a hand. "Overruled." "Continue, Miss Miller." I pulled out my phone, scrolling to the screenshot I had saved. "This is a text my mother sent to my father," I said, handing it to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. "If we ask Rachel, she'll say no. Just sign it. She won't dare fight us." The courtroom was so silent I could hear the ticking of the clock on the wall. Judge Carter read the message, her eyes narrowing slightly. I looked back at my parents. My mother was shaking her head, whispering, "No, no, no." My father's face turned pale, and Sophie's hand flew to her mouth as she started to cry. I felt the fear leave my body, replaced with something stronger. Truth. "Your Honor, I have worked since I was 16, put myself through college, and saved every dollar to protect my future." I continued, my voice shaking but firm. "They thought I would stay silent to keep the family peace, but I won't let them take everything I've worked for." Mark stepped forward. "No further questions, Your Honor." Blake looked rattled as he stood. "Miss Miller, didn't your family help you growing up?" I met his eyes. "My family provided the basics, but I paid my way through college and built my life alone," I said. "Is it true you make enough money to help your sister?" he pressed. I leaned forward. "It doesn't matter how much money I make," I said. "It's about consent. It's about respect." Blake opened his mouth to speak, but Judge Carter held up her hand. "I've heard enough," she said, her voice firm. She looked at my parents, then at me. "There is clear evidence of forgery, misuse of financial documents, and fraudulent acquisition of a mortgage in this case." My mother let out a sob. Sophie buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking. Judge Carter glanced at the clock. "I will issue my ruling within 7 days." She banged the gavel once, and the courtroom doors opened, the sound echoing in my chest. Mark leaned over, his voice low. "This is it, Rachel. Get ready." I thought I would feel victorious when I won, but that feeling never came. I was at my desk, the afternoon sun pouring through the window, when my phone rang. It was Mark. "Rachel," he said, his voice steady, "the judge issued the ruling." I held my breath. "You won." I let out a shaky exhale, gripping the edge of my desk to keep steady. "The judge ruled the mortgage was obtained through fraud," Mark continued. "It's canceled and your credit will be cleared. Your parents have been ordered to pay $12,000 in attorney's fees." I closed my eyes, letting the words sink in. "You did it, Rachel," Mark said softly. I wanted to feel relief, joy, satisfaction, something. But all I felt was tired. After we hung up, I sat there for a long time, listening to the hum of the heater, staring at the ceiling. The next morning, I heard that the bank had contacted Tom and Linda demanding payment on the mortgage. If they didn't pay, the house would go into foreclosure. I imagined Sophie packing boxes, tears in her eyes, blaming me with every breath. I imagined my parents arguing in their cramped kitchen, the tension thick, blaming me for the mess they created. And for a moment, I felt sorry for them. But that moment passed. I made myself coffee and opened my laptop to check emails, needing to distract my mind from the guilt that tried to crawl back in. As I scrolled, a notification popped up on my phone. It was a text from Sophie. "You destroyed this family. Are you happy now?" I stared at the words, my thumb hovering over the reply button. But I didn't respond. Instead, I put my phone down, wrapped my hands around my coffee cup, and let the silence fill the room. I set the coffee cup down, my fingers tracing the rim, trying to quiet the shaking in my hands. I thought about calling Emily, but I didn't know what to say. How do you explain that you won, but feel like you lost everything at the same time? My phone buzzed again, and for a moment, I thought it was Sophie sending another message to dig the knife in deeper. But it was Mark. "Call me when you're ready to talk through next steps," his text read. I typed back, "Will do, thanks." I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the quiet Denver street below, the early evening light casting long shadows over the parked cars. A couple walked by holding hands, laughing softly, and I wondered if they had parents who loved them without conditions. I wondered if they knew how lucky they were. I sat back down, pulling my knees to my chest on the couch, and let myself feel it for a moment. The sadness, the betrayal, the exhaustion that clung to every bone in my body. I remembered the nights I stayed awake worrying about how to pay my bills while my parents used my name to buy a house for Sophie. I remembered the panic when HR called me and the shame of seeing Sophie's GoFundMe calling me a monster. I remembered sitting in court watching my mother cry and call me ungrateful as if I had chosen any of this. A tear slid down my cheek and I wiped it away quickly as if someone might see even though I was alone. I picked up my phone, scrolling back through the old messages from my parents. Family helps family. You're selfish. You'll kill your mother if you keep this up. The words still stung even now. I put the phone down and stood walking to the small bookshelf in the corner, pulling down the framed photo of us from Thanksgiving 3 years ago. We were all smiling, arms around each other, plates of pumpkin pie on the table. I stared at that photo, searching for the family I thought I had. But it wasn't there. I placed the photo face down on the shelf. That night, I cooked myself dinner, just a simple pasta with garlic and spinach, the steam rising as I stirred. I sat at the table, eating slowly, letting the quiet fill the room, reminding myself that this quiet was mine. No one could take that from me now. When I finished, I washed the dishes, wiped down the counter, and locked the door. I crawled into bed, pulling the blankets up to my chin, staring at the ceiling as the city lights flickered outside. I thought about Sophie's message. You destroyed this family. Maybe I did, I thought. Or maybe I just stopped letting them destroy me. The next morning I woke up before sunrise, the city still quiet, the sky a pale gray. I made coffee and stood by the window, letting the warmth of the mug seep into my hands. A part of me wanted to call my mother, to hear her voice, to pretend this was just a bad dream that could be undone with a single conversation. But I knew that was a lie. Around 9, my phone rang. It was Emily. "How are you holding up?" she asked. I hesitated, staring at the steam rising from my coffee. "I don't know," I said honestly. "I thought I'd feel free. But it just feels empty." Emily was quiet for a moment. "You did what you had to do, Rachel," she said. "That's not something to feel guilty about." "I know," I whispered. We talked for a few minutes, and when we hung up I felt a little less alone. Later that day, I went for a walk around Cheeseman Park, the air cool, the leaves rustling under my boots. I watched a family having a picnic, a father tossing a football to his son, while the mother laughed, holding a thermos of coffee. I felt that ache again, the longing for something I never really had. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I pulled it out, expecting another message from Sophie. But it wasn't. It was an email. The subject line read, "Thank you for speaking up." I frowned and opened it. "Hi Rachel, you don't know me, but I saw your case in a local legal forum. I went through something similar with my family, and I just wanted to say thank you for having the courage to stand up. You made me feel less alone." I read it twice, my eyes blurring with tears. Someone understood. Someone out there was watching, listening, and maybe finding the courage to protect themselves too. I typed back, my fingers trembling. "Thank you for reaching out. I'm sorry you went through something similar. You're not alone either." I hit send and set the phone down, taking a deep breath. In that moment, I realized this wasn't just about me. It was about breaking a cycle. It was about showing others they didn't have to accept financial abuse, even from family. As I looked out at the families in the park, the sun breaking through the clouds, I felt a small spark of something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Then my phone buzzed again, and I glanced down. It was from Mark. "Call me when you can. We need to discuss what comes next." I lost my family, but I found myself again. When I walked back into the office that Monday, my palms were sweating. I could feel every eye on me as I crossed the floor to my desk, the quiet hum of keyboards pausing for a moment. But when I sat down, I felt steady. My manager Kelly came over, leaning on the divider. "Glad to have you back, Rachel," she said. I nodded, a small smile tugging at my lips. "Thank you," I said. "It's good to be back." I turned on my monitor, logged in, and let the familiar flow of numbers and spreadsheets calm my mind. At lunch, I checked my credit score. It had inched back up to 730, climbing slowly from the mess it had become. I started packing lunch again, cutting back on takeout, funneling every extra dollar into rebuilding my emergency fund. Every small step felt like a piece of myself returning. One Saturday morning, I stood in front of a small group of women at a local community center, sharing my story for the first time. They sat in a circle, some nodding, some with tears in their eyes, as I spoke about financial abuse within families. How it doesn't always look like screaming or threats. How sometimes it's quiet, wrapped in family loyalty. How it can drain you until there's nothing left. A woman in the back raised her hand. "How did you find the courage to say no?" she asked. I paused, looking down at my hands. I realized no one was coming to save me, I said. And I deserved to save myself. When the session ended, a few women hugged me, whispering, "Thank you." Walking to my car, I felt lighter than I had in months. That night, I sat on my small balcony, a blanket wrapped around my shoulders, watching the Denver skyline flicker against the dark. The air was crisp, carrying the sounds of distant traffic and the laughter of neighbors down the street. I held a cup of tea, letting the steam warm my face, breathing in the quiet. My phone buzzed with a notification, and for a moment my heart jumped, afraid it was another message from Sophie. But it was an email from Kelly. "Just wanted to say again, we're glad you're back. You've always been one of the strongest people I know." I set the phone down, tears welling up, but this time they were soft, grateful tears. The next morning, I walked into a small real estate office on Colfax, the air thick with the scent of coffee and paper. "Rachel Miller," the agent called out, smiling warmly. "Yes," I said, stepping forward. We sat down, reviewing the final paperwork for the one-bedroom condo I was about to close on. Mortgage $210,000. In my name. Only my name. As I signed the last page, I felt something shift inside me. A quiet, steady confidence I hadn't felt in years. Walking out of the office with the keys in my hand, I stood in the morning sun, closing my eyes, letting the warmth wash over me. This was mine. No one could take it from me. Later that evening, I ordered pizza, sat cross-legged on the floor of my empty condo, boxes stacked around me, and took the first bite. I let myself smile. For the first time in a long time, I felt safe. A week after moving in, I finally unpacked the last box, placing a small plant on the kitchen counter. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that used to scare me. Now it felt like freedom. That afternoon, I checked my email, scrolling past promotions and bills until one subject line made me freeze. "Sophie." I hesitated before clicking it open, my stomach tightening. Her message was short. "I've started therapy. I see now you might have been right about some things. I'm not ready to forgive you, but I wanted you to know." I read it twice, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. I took a deep breath before typing back. "I'm glad you're taking care of yourself. I wish you well." I hit send, feeling a soft ache in my chest, but also relief. This was closure in its own imperfect way. I stepped out onto my balcony, the Denver skyline glowing under the evening sky, and let the cold air fill my lungs. A neighbor's dog barked in the distance, and for the first time I didn't feel weighed down by the past. Later that night, I sat with my laptop, joining a virtual workshop on financial abuse awareness. When it was my turn, I shared my story, watching the faces of women from across the country, listening, nodding, wiping away tears. "I am not an ATM for anyone," I told them, my voice steady. "I am me." A woman in the corner of the screen unmuted. "Thank you," she whispered, "for giving us permission to say no." After the meeting ended, I closed my laptop, leaning back on the couch, letting the quiet wash over me. My phone buzzed with a notification, a comment on one of my older posts. "You helped me leave a toxic situation. Thank you." I smiled, letting the warmth of those words settle into the quiet spaces inside me. I glanced around my small condo, the soft glow of the lamp casting a comforting light on the freshly painted walls. This was my home. My choice. My life. The next morning, I woke up to sunlight pouring through the sheer curtains, warming my face. I stretched, pulling the blanket tighter around me, taking a moment to listen to the quiet hum of the heater and the distant sounds of cars below. This was my space. I brewed a cup of coffee, the rich scent filling the air as I leaned against the counter. I scrolled through my phone, seeing another message from the workshop group. Your story gave me the courage to confront my parents, one woman wrote. I set the phone down, blinking back tears, letting her words sink in. After breakfast, I pulled on a coat and walked down to the local farmer's market, a small tote bag over my shoulder. Vendors were setting up stalls, the air filled with the scent of fresh bread and roasted coffee beans. I bought a bunch of sunflowers, placing them in the middle of my kitchen table when I returned, letting their bright yellow fill the room with quiet hope. Later that afternoon, Emily called. "So," she said, her voice warm, "how's it feel to have your own place on your own terms?" I laughed softly, tucking my feet under me on the couch. "It feels like I can breathe again," I said. "Like I'm not waiting for the next demand." "I'm proud of you, Rachel," she said. "You deserve this." We talked about small things, about a new coffee shop opening down the street, about a book she was reading. For the first time in a long time, a conversation wasn't weighed down by fear or shame. That evening, I opened my laptop, logging in to the budgeting app I had used for years. I updated my emergency fund goals, setting small milestones, watching the numbers slowly rebuild. I checked my credit score again, seeing it tick up by another point. It was slow, but it was steady. Before bed, I pulled out a small notebook, writing down what I wanted to build next. A plan for the future that was mine. Not dictated by guilt, not driven by fear, mine. As I turned off the lamp, climbing into bed, I let out a deep breath. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was living. If you've ever had to set boundaries with your family to protect yourself, I want to hear your story. What would you have done if you were me? Have you ever been in a situation like this? Share in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories like this.